The most powerful weapon in modern warfare is not a nuclear missile. It is not a cyber attack. It is not even a naval blockade. The most powerful weapon in 2026 is a signature on a piece of paper that says you cannot sell your goods to the richest consumer market on Earth. On January 12, 2026, President Donald Trump signed an executive order that sent shockwaves through the global economy. The order was simple, brutal, and absolutely devastating. Any country, any company, any bank that does business with Iran will now face a 25% tariff on all goods they try to sell to the United States. The markets did not wait to react. Within hours, the yuan collapsed against the dollar. Indian exporters began frantically calling their American buyers, begging for clarity. Turkish banks started severing ties with Iranian accounts. And in the boardrooms of Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party realized that the trade war they thought they had survived was not over. It had just entered its most dangerous phase. To the casual observer, this looks like a move against Iran, a punishment for their nuclear program or their support of militias in the Middle East. But that is the cover story. This is not about Iran. This is about China. This is about choking the second largest economy on the planet by forcing them to choose between access to Iranian oil and access to the American market. And if you understand the mechanics of this trap, you will see that Trump has just deployed the economic equivalent of a nuclear option, one that will not just hurt China, but will send inflation screaming back into the lives of every single American family. Welcome to the weaponization of trade. To understand why this executive order is so dangerous, you have to understand the invisible bond between China and Iran. For the last decade, while the United States was busy sanctioning Iran, trying to isolate them from the global financial system, China was quietly doing the opposite. They were building a lifeline. Iran sits on the fourth largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Billions of barrels of crude oil that the world desperately needs, but that most countries refuse to buy because of American sanctions. China does not care about American sanctions when it comes to their energy security. They need oil. They need it to power their factories, to keep their lights on, to fuel their economy. And Iran needs buyers. So they struck a deal that operates in the shadows of the global financial system. China buys Iranian oil, but they do not pay in dollars. They pay in yuan, or in barter deals where Chinese goods are exchanged for Iranian crude. This allows both countries to survive outside the reach of the American banking system. It is a workaround, a middle finger to Washington's dominance over global finance. By some estimates, China imports over 90% of Iran's oil exports. We are talking about roughly 1 million barrels per day flowing from the Persian Gulf to the refineries of the East. That is not a small trade relationship. That is a strategic dependence. And it is not just oil. China has poured billions of dollars into Iranian infrastructure projects. Ports, railways, telecommunications networks, all part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Iran is a critical piece of China's strategy to connect Asia to Europe through land routes that bypass American-controlled sea lanes. Losing Iran would be a geopolitical catastrophe for Beijing. But now, Trump has put a gun to their head. The executive order is elegantly simple in its cruelty. It says that if you buy oil from Iran, if you invest in Iranian infrastructure, if you trade with Iranian banks, then every single product you try to sell to the United States will be hit with a 25% tariff. For China, this is an impossible choice. On one side, you have Iranian oil, which keeps your economy running. On the other side, you have the American market, the single largest destination for Chinese exports. In 2025, the United States imported over $400 billion worth of goods from China. Clothing, electronics, machinery, furniture, toys, all of it made in Chinese factories and sold to American consumers. A 25% tariff on all of that would be an economic massacre. It would make Chinese goods so expensive that American companies would be forced to find new suppliers in Vietnam, in India, in Mexico. Chinese factories would go dark, workers would be laid off, and the Chinese government, which has built its entire legitimacy on delivering economic growth, would face a crisis that could shake the Communist Party to its core. So Trump is betting that China will fold. He is betting that Beijing will cut off Iran, stop buying their oil, abandon their infrastructure projects, and come crawling back to Washington to negotiate. But here's the problem. China might not fold, they might call the bluff, and if they do, the consequences will not just hurt China, they will devastate the American economy. Let us be absolutely clear about what happens if China refuses to comply with this tariff threat. If Beijing decides that Iranian oil is more important than access to the American market, they will continue buying from Iran. And when they do, Trump will have no choice but to follow through. He will impose the 25% tariff. And the moment he does, the price of everything in America will explode. Walk into any Walmart, any Target, any Home Depot in this country and look at the shelves. The electronics, the furniture, the kitchen appliances, the power tools, the toys your kids play with, nearly all of it comes from China. A 25% tariff does not get absorbed by the Chinese factory owner. It gets passed directly to you, the American consumer. That television that cost $500 will now cost $625. That smartphone will jump from $800 to $1,000. Your kid's sneakers will go from $50 to $62. This is not a theoretical problem. This is not some abstract trade policy debate. This is a tax on every single household in the United States. And it will hit the poorest families the hardest. The people who shop at discount stores, who live paycheck to paycheck, they are the ones who will feel this the most. And inflation, the monster that the Federal Reserve spent the last 3 years trying to kill, will come roaring back to life. Trump knows this. His economic advisors have run the numbers. They understand that this gamble could backfire spectacularly. But they are making a calculation. They believe that the pain China will feel is greater than the pain America will feel. They believe that China, with its slowing economy, its collapsing real estate sector, and its angry population demanding jobs, cannot afford to lose access to the American market. They believe Beijing will blink first. But what if they are wrong? What if China has spent the last 5 years preparing for exactly this moment? Because while Washington was distracted by domestic politics, China was quietly building an alternative economic system. They were signing trade deals with countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They were creating the BRICS payment system to bypass the dollar. They were stockpiling commodities, gold, oil, grain, preparing for the day when the United States would try to cut them off. And now that day has arrived. If China decides to endure the pain, if they accept the loss of the American market and pivot entirely toward the global South, this executive order will not weaken China. It will accelerate the collapse of American economic dominance. But there is another victim in this war, a victim that no one is talking about: India. India is the second largest buyer of Iranian oil after China. They import roughly 200,000 barrels per day. Not because they love Iran, but because Iranian oil is cheap and India is desperate for energy to fuel its massive population and growing economy. Indian refineries are specifically designed to process Iranian crude. Switching suppliers would take months, cost billions, and still leave India short on supply. But now Trump has put India in the same impossible position as China. Stop buying from Iran or face a 25% tariff on all exports to the United States. For India, this is a nightmare. The United States is India's largest trading partner. In 2025, India exported over $70 billion worth of goods to America: pharmaceuticals, textiles, IT services, machinery. A 25% tariff would cripple Indian exporters and destroy hundreds of thousands of jobs. But if India stops buying Iranian oil, they will face energy shortages, blackouts, and economic chaos at home. The Indian government is caught between two superpowers and has no good options. And then there's Turkey, the European Union, South Korea, Japan, all of whom have smaller but still significant trade relationships with Iran. Every single one of them is now being forced to pick a side. Do business with Iran and lose access to America, or cut off Iran and watch your energy costs explode. This is not diplomacy. This is economic warfare. Trump has turned tariffs into a weapon of mass disruption. The collateral damage is going to be felt across the entire planet. But here's the most dangerous part of this strategy. It assumes that the rest of the world will continue playing by American rules. It assumes that countries will value access to the US market more than their own sovereignty. And that assumption is starting to crack. For decades, the global economy has been built on a simple premise. The United States is the center of the world. The dollar is the reserve currency. American consumers are the engine of global demand. If you want to get rich, you sell to America. But what happens when that premise is no longer true? What happens when countries look at Trump's tariff threats and decide they are tired of being bullied? What happens when they start building trade networks that deliberately exclude the United States? That is the risk Trump is taking. He is betting that America still has enough economic gravity to bend the world to its will. But the world is changing. And this executive order might be the moment historians look back on and say, that was when the empire pushed too hard. The real tragedy of this tariff war is that the people making the decisions, the politicians, the trade negotiators, the billionaires advising the president, they will not feel the pain. They will not stand in line at the grocery store and watch their bill climb higher every week. They will not have to explain to their kids why Christmas is smaller this year because prices went up. They will not lose their jobs when the factory shuts down because the supply chain collapsed. The people who will pay for this economic war are the ordinary Americans who just want to live their lives, pay their bills, and maybe save a little bit for the future. But that future is being gambled away in a high-stakes poker game where the chips are your paycheck, your savings, and your standard of living. If this tariff stands, if China refuses to back down, you will feel it within weeks. The price of electronics will spike just as families are trying to replace broken laptops and phones. The cost of furniture and home goods will jump right as people are trying to furnish apartments and fix up their homes. Clothing, shoes, basic household items, all of it will get more expensive. And the cruelest part is that this inflation will not be temporary. Once prices go up, they rarely come back down. Companies will use this tariff as an excuse to raise prices permanently, even after the trade war ends. You will be stuck paying more forever for goods that used to be affordable. And what do you get in return? The promise that America is standing tough, that we are not backing down, that we are teaching China a lesson. But the lesson being taught is not the one Trump thinks. The lesson is that the United States is willing to burn down the global economy to maintain its dominance. And the rest of the world is watching. They are taking notes. They are building alternatives. And they are preparing for the day when they no longer need America at all. This is not about Iran. Iran is just the excuse, the justification for a much larger strategy. This is about trying to break China before China breaks us. This is about using economic leverage while we still have it, before the yuan becomes a viable alternative to the dollar, before the Belt and Road Initiative connects half the planet in a network that bypasses American ports. Trump and his advisors believe that this is the last chance to stop the rise of a rival superpower. But what if they are right about the threat and wrong about the solution? What if this tariff does not stop China, but instead accelerates the very thing it was designed to prevent? What if the world looks at this moment and decides that relying on the United States is too risky, too volatile, too dangerous? History has a long memory. And empires that weaponize their power too aggressively often discover that the weapon becomes the instrument of their own downfall. The ghost of every failed empire is watching this moment. The British Empire tried to control global trade through force and lost it all. The Soviet Union tried to control its sphere through coercion and collapsed from within. And now the American empire is trying to control the world through tariffs, sanctions, and financial pressure. The question is not whether this will work in the short term. The question is what kind of world we are building for the long term, and whether the price we pay today will be worth the future we inherit tomorrow. If you want to understand the forces shaping your wallet, your economy, and your future, subscribe to Empire Trap. We break down the stories the mainstream media will not touch, and leave a comment below. Do you think Trump's tariff strategy will force China to back down? Or is this the beginning of the end for American economic dominance? I read every comment. See you in the next episode. This video is for educational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions.